Warframe 1999 brought a bunch of new mods, arcanes, and an ability that is so strong that it might single-handedly revive older off-meta frames. So, in today's guide, I'm gonna give you an overview of what's new, in which scenarios you might want to use the new stuff, and of course, which of these new mods and arcanes are the very best. As always, a massive shout out to all our generous channel members who helped me keep the lights on, and now, well, let's jump right into it. Alright, so the first thing we need to talk about in today's video is not something that necessarily came new with Warframe 1999, but a rework to a mechanic that we've had for long, this being elemental infusions. See, as it stands right now, multiple Warframes in this game have the ability to infuse their weapons, and those of teammates in range, with specific elements. I'm talking about Frost, I'm talking about Ember's Fireball Frenzy, Seren, Oberon, and many more. For those Warframes that infuse a combined element, like Seren with Corrosive for example, in the future, nothing really changes. However, those abilities and ability augments that infuse one of the four base elements, that being heat, cold, electricity, or toxin, this mechanic will change quite significantly, and here is how. In the past, using these infusions kind of worked like adding another elemental mod onto the weapon. Meaning, for example, if you had cold on your weapon and then you would use Fireball Frenzy from Ember to get heat, the heat from the ability augment would combine with the cold that you already have on your weapon to turn into blast. However, with Warframe 1999, this changed, and now elemental infusions do no longer combine with whatever is on your weapon. Meaning, in the same scenario now, you would keep the cold on the weapon and get heat in addition to it, but they wouldn't fuse into blast. Now, talking about which specific Warframes and loadouts would benefit most from it and which might be hurt by this change, that would go way too far for this video, and I probably couldn't even think of all the possible applications myself right off the bat now. Just note that what's important for you is, if you know that you have a loadout that uses one of these mechanics, then it's definitely worth revisiting it and seeing if it still works, or if you might have to tweak a couple of things to adapt to the new realities of how those elemental infusions work. And as always, if you could maybe spare a like for the video, that would be super amazing because it helps me big time with the YouTube algorithm, so cheers so much for your support. But now let's talk about something that's actually new, where I want to start out with the new mods that we got with Warframe 1999, and there are quite a lot of them. Starting out, we got two new aura mods, going by the name Summoner's Wrath as well as Worthy Comradery, and I personally find them very interesting. Let's start out with Worthy Comradery, with the massive plus 75% weak point crit chance that it gives to the entire squad, meaning if you can nail those headshots, they're gonna hit even harder. As for Summoner's Wrath, this one is definitely more niche because it focuses on the damage that your companion as well as summons from abilities do, so you're probably going to use it in situations where the loadout is focused on making your companion the main damage dealer, or on Warframes like Necros, like Caliban, where the whole point is that the minions that you summon deal the damage for you. However, there are way more things that count as summons in Warframe. I'm gonna put you an image in the background so you can see it for yourself. And specifically the Bladestorm from Ash, that looks really interesting, and when I get to making an Ash build hopefully next year, then maybe I get to play around a bit with this. As for where to get those mods, unfortunately the Warframe wiki isn't fully updated yet on all the new mods and arcanes as of making this video, so I have to do a bit of guesswork here, but I would expect to find those aura mods in the Nightwave shop rotation in the upcoming weeks, and they're probably also going to be dropped from specific enemies in the Warframe 1999 tile sets. The next mod I want to talk about is Spectral Serration, giving you plus 330% fat base damage when you are invisible. As the name says, this is a sub-variant of the normal Serration mod, meaning you cannot have both of them on the weapon at the same time, but all in all I find myself liking this one quite a bit. See, as it stands right now, most primary weapons in higher levels still rely on a weapon arcane for the base damage portion because the fat 360% that you get from arcanes are just that much stronger than what Serration can deliver. Meaning at the end of the day, it was always a bit sad that there are so many cool primary arcanes that you kind of want to try out, but you also know that you're going to be severely lacking in the damage portion if you do so. But with Spectral Serration right now, at least for every invisible frame, you can actually go and finally mod again for base damage, which would then free up your arcane slot to go for something like maybe Primary Blight, giving you more crit damage, more multi-shot, Primary Frostbite, same thing, or also something completely experimental or different, depending on what your build needs. All in all, I would say Spectral Serration, not a must-have because, you know, it only works on stealth frames anyway, but for those frames that can use it, it definitely enables a lot more build variety. Also here, the only source for drops I can find right now is from Skuldra enemies in the Warframe 99 tileset. Up next, we have two mods that do basically the same, those being Primary and Pistol Acuity. What they do is they give your weapon plus 350% weak point damage and also 350% more weak point crit chance. That is a huge buff if you nail those headshots. However, it comes at the cost of multi-shot, because when you use those mods, then your multi-shot for the weapon will be locked at 1 and it cannot get higher even if you mod for it. So it's a kind of trade-off, and you might wonder whether it's actually worth it. Well, of course, it always comes down to the weapon in specific and what you use it for, but on paper, the damage that you're dealing per shot is kind of roughly the same if you compare one of the Acuity mods with what you would get if you use a Galvanized Multi-Shot mod, so I don't think it's all that overpowered, but probably there are also going to be scenarios that I can't think of right now where the Acuity mods are actually really good. I'm thinking maybe Eidolon hunting, but again, I'm a complete noob on Eidolons. I have no idea about that whole thing at all, I openly admit that, so maybe some of you who are more experienced with it can share your opinions on this in terms of Eidolons in the comments down below. One thing I should mention here is that apparently there are still some bugs and inconsistencies with the multipliers on these mods. The wiki states quite some of it, so I'm just gonna put it on screen right now without comment, and let's see how much of this will actually stay and is intentional, and what might be fixed in the upcoming hotfixes. And also those mods are dropped from Skuldra enemies. Next mod would be Merciless Gunfight, a pistol mod that gives you crit damage as well as punch through. In general, I don't think that this one right here is going to be all too build changing in the grand scheme of things, but I could imagine that this might actually be quite nice on the regulators for Mesa, giving them a bit of punch through in those high enemy density scenarios. I'm definitely going to try that out at some point in the future. As for the next mods, I actually want to go and group them all up because they're kinda sorta doing the same thing, and that will be the new magnetic mods available for all types of weapons. We have Magnetized Cycle for the Archon Magnetic and Fire Rate, Magnetized Core Magnetic and crit damage for the Arc melee, Magnetic Strafe with Fire Rate as the second stat for the shotgun, Claws giving magnetic to your companion's claws, Magnetic Capacity for your rifle, that also gives more magazine capacity, Magnetic Rush for the melee giving magnetic and attack speed, as well as Magnetic Might, this being for the pistol, plus magnetic and plus crit damage. Now, all in all, also here, I don't think that these magnetic mods are going to be all too meta changing, but just like with the radiation versions of this that we got roughly a year ago, I would say, they are of course always nice, enabling you to get a combined element onto your weapon without having to dedicate 2 separate mod slots for it. You can now do that in just 1, so that definitely will come in handy, especially for those weapons that want to deal as many different status effects as possible. The, in my opinion, most interesting one of those would be Magnetic Rush for the melee, because it might make it a bit more attractive to build a melee with this into magnetic and then go for melee vortex to suck in the enemies. I don't think it's necessarily going to dethrone melee influence as the most meta item on melees in the game, but nonetheless it's going to be a blessing for every melee vortex build out there. You should at least give it a try. However, there are 2 more mods here I want to mention, those being Magnetic Welt for shotguns, which kind of is the same thing as Internal Bleeding, just that here it turns impact status effects into magnetic and not into slash. And then also finally we got a radiation mod for the companion claws, but this is not really so much new, because back in the day when the dual stat radiation mods were introduced, we didn't have companion claws as a weapon type just yet, so it only makes sense to now also deliver the missing radiation version here. Overall, I think the new magnetic mods are definitely interesting, specifically given the fact that magnetic is now quote-unquote the way to shred away enemy overguard, so I could imagine that they become more and more relevant in the updates to come, but at the point of writing this right now, I don't think they're meta redefining just yet. But all these mods are of course not the only new things that we got. We also received 7 very interesting new arcanes about which I want to talk now. The first one on the list would be Primary Crux, which is a primary weapon arcane, and what it does is, on a weak point hit, your weapon will get plus 30% status chance and plus 6% ammo efficiency for 10 seconds, stacking up to 10 times. So you can get a massive plus 300% status chance and plus 60% ammo efficiency out of this, which is definitely nothing to scoff at. I first thought this would be nice on maybe AoE primary weapon primers, but given the fact that it only triggers on weak point hits, it, I think the best situation to use this in is on already very high status chance weapons that want to deal as many damage over time effects as possible in a short period of time to then melt away the enemies with DOT effects. You know, I'm thinking about something like maybe the Convectrix. Next, we have an arcane that I'm probably about to mispronounce, which would be Doughty? Doughty? I have never heard this word in my life, but this one is fairly interesting because it gives you a final 1x crit damage multiplier for every 10% puncture status chance on your melee weapon. What this means is, when you hover over the status tab in your weapon stats, then it's gonna open a window that lists the proc chance for every single damage type on the weapon, and for every 10% of the puncture part of this, you will get a 1x final crit damage multiplier. Meaning in this example right here with the Destrezza Prime, at max rank, this should give me a final plus 4x crit damage. So it definitely can be very strong, but only on those melees that are already very puncture focused, like this one here, but also if I remember it right, the Ceramic Dagger and Carnon should as well have a relatively high puncture percentage. It might be worth a try. Up next, what I did is group together 4 arcanes, all of them being for the Warframe, and all of them increasing your Warframe's ability strength. The first one being Arcane Camisado, and what it does is it gives you a lot of street credit in Inazuma and 6% more ability strength every time that a summoned minion deals damage to an enemy, as well as some movement speed for those summons. Now, this one, just like Mole Augmented, gives you 60% ability strength, so it either is a nice replacement on Summoner Warframes, who will have a much easier time to keep this one up in comparison to the 250 kills required for Mole Augmented, or if you wanted to, you could go all in on ability strength and just use both of them at the same time. Just note that for Arcane Camisado, the ability strength buff resets every time that you cast an ability, so you gotta make sure that your minions are on the field dishing out damage. Oh yeah, and I personally haven't maxed my Arcane out yet, just in case you were wondering why my stats look a bit off here. Next, we have Arcane Impetus, which gives you ability strength and ability efficiency for every unique status effect that you deal with Warframe abilities. Now, given the fact that we have, I think, a total of 15 different status types in the game, this could theoretically stack up to plus 90% strength and plus 45% efficiency, but I think on the other hand, not that many Warframes will benefit from this. I think it's best used on Kome, where it can stack really crazy high with her 4th ability, but in general, I personally don't see all that much use for it. The next one would be Arcane Bellicose, and this one is very straightforward, giving you 6% ability strength for every 250 maximum health that you have, up to a maximum of 72%. This is a very simple, small upgrade over Mold Augmented, but you would have to have 3000 maximum health to get the max benefit from it, so it's best used on health tanks like Inaros, like Nidus, or some other frames that are a bit chunkier in their health. It's not really worth it to mod Warframes into more maximum health that usually don't want to have it just to make Arcane Bellicose work. It's more of a situation where you would use Arcane Bellicose on those frames that already happen to have a lot of health to begin with. And finally, we have my absolute favorite of the new arcanes, and that would be Arcane Crepuscular, which is just incredibly freaking powerful. While you are invisible, you gain plus 30% ability strength, which is already nice, but the kicker here is also you get plus 3 times final crit damage multiplier. Yeah, that is crazy. I think Arcane Crepuscular going forward is going to be a must arcane on every stealth frame that mainly deals weapon damage, and this is a synergy that you absolutely have to test out, Wisp has Breach Surge. Breach Surge is a skill that can crit, but just with a 1.5 times multiplier, and it cannot be changed with mods. However, it can be increased by stuff like Tenacious Bond, which was already a very OP combination on Wisp, but now you could also give her Arcane Crepuscular, which together with Tenacious Bond would increase the crit damage of your Surge Sparks from a 1.5 times multiplier to a 5.7 times one. And the best part about it is, Wisp is invisible whenever she's in the air, and she is invisible whenever she shoots out her little clone. And yes, I tested this. This actually works with Arcane Crepuscular. So they took one of the most overpowered frames in the entire game and just thought, well, maybe she could need a little bit more strength, right? But alright, These would be the 4 new ability strength arcanes that we got with Warframe 1999, and I think they are a very interesting thing, because they don't really make Mold Augmented obsolete, right? This is still your universal ability strength arcane that works on basically every Warframe out there. But what they did is they gave us a couple of alternatives that kind of do the same thing, but they do so in more niche ways to enable more build variety with specific setups. However, that's not all, we still have 2 more arcanes to go. One of them would be Arcane Truculence, which is very interesting, because what it does is, for every 3000 Overguard that you're getting, you will create an AoE that viral primes every enemy within it with 10 viral procs. This happens in every 3000 Overguard intervals. As you also see right here, my Dante gets the first AoE once he reaches 3000, then he gets another one once he reaches 6000, and so on and so forth. But what that also means is, it only works on setups where you're also constantly losing enough Overguard to be able to refresh that and keep up those viral AoEs. Overall though, I think especially for Warframes that can generate Overguard through abilities, this is a very interesting option that I'm gonna look into more in the future. And finally, we have another absolute kicker, and that would be Secondary Enervate, which is relatively niche in terms of how many weapons are actually going to be benefiting from it, but those that do, and that would be, I think, the Kuva Nukor and not much more, will benefit a lot. What it does is, for every hit that you deal with the weapon, you will increase the weapon's crit chance by 10%. This is a final multiplier like Arcane Avenger, so your crit chance will stack very, very quickly. However, this crit chance buff will also reset as soon as you've dealt 6 orange crits. Now, what that means is, it turns secondary weapons that have no crit chance whatsoever into viable crit weapons. The Kuva Nukor, of course, would be the best example here, having a very high crit damage multiplier but barely any crit chance. Slap Secondary Enervate on it, and all of a sudden your Nukor is a viable crit weapon, and believe me when I say, this thing absolutely slaps. I've already tried it out, you can see it in the background. It is a night and day difference. All these arcanes can be obtained from Eleanor for Hex Standing, as well as from the Warframe 1999 calendar, from Tekrot and Skuldra caches in the Helvania missions, as well as from the Tank Boss Fight Assassination and the Helvania Face-Off missions. And finally, there is one specific ability that we need to talk about here that was also introduced with Warframe 1999, that being Evade from Side09. Now, I don't want to go all too much into what Side09 himself does, because I do have a full Side09 guide out already, but what Evade does is, it makes you invisible, and you can keep this invisibility up by getting headshot kills, and the special thing about it is that it is Side09's helmet ability, so you can now make every single Warframe in the game invisible if you want to. Now, I personally think this is incredibly powerful, because 99% of the enemies in the game can totally not deal with that at all, but it not only gives you this massive survivability through the invisibility, but it also now enables every Warframe to use Arcane Crepuscular, you know, the more crit damage multiplier, as well as Spectral Serration. So it's not only an absolutely OP survivability tool, but you get rewarded with even more damage on top of that. I personally think, especially more glass cannon-y type of Warframes, benefit ridiculously from it because it solves their one issue and gives them even more damage on top. I would definitely recommend that you try this on your Gunrunner Saren, as well as maybe also on Harrow, because here too it synergizes nicely with his headshot-focused playstyle. However, buffing up the already very strong Warframes isn't everything. With the invisibility too now, also more off-meta frames that have always struggled with survivability, especially in Steel Path, like for example my boy Excalibur, are now all of a sudden very much Steel Path viable. Especially with him, I'm probably gonna look into making a new build for 2025 that will incorporate this stealth skill. And if you want to learn more about Side09 with full build and everything, then don't miss out my guide on him right here. Another massive shout out to Niels V, Demon Lord Zell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nost Linux Gaming, Turtlepeer, Lyca and Shepherd, Ondakanio2, Pepperwolf, Signup King 5000, Mihawk HE, Yagis, Hoke Hunter, Noob Phoenix, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one. In case that's not in 2024 anymore, I wish you a happy new year too, and as always, good loot.